What if the clothes we wear could wage peace instead of war?
It just doesn't make sense. Why do you need to kill people to get rid of the bad guys to find peace?
Today on Women of Agents of Change, meet Una Ray, fashion environmentalist, UN policy advisor, and global peace advocate.
I always remember that I was brought up in a way that I had to respect animals, and that probably also has played a huge role in me choosing environmentalism.
That childhood curiosity grew into a mission to reimagine fashion as activism, to turn invasive algae into biotextiles, and to help coastal women earn livelihoods while protecting our oceans.
I started making these pieces of activism that spoke about new age materials from the fabric of our oceans.
And that change goes beyond fashion. It reaches jails, red light districts, refugee camps, uniting the world under one peace canvas at a time.
It's only when you're curious you would search for solutions and understand what's happening around you.
This is more than a conversation. This is a movement. Welcome to Women of Agents of Change with Una Ray.
So, to introduce myself, I am Runa Ray. I wasn't a fashion environmentalist. I mean, I was born in Bangalore, India, in the south, and I was basically taken care of by my grandparents in my early years. I was a very introverted child, so my mother gave me books. So I started reading at a very, very early age. I do remember reading Oliver Twist when I was probably 3 to 4 years old. That was the that shows you how quickly I started actually getting into reading, to a point that started becoming a problem when I turned 15, because at that point, the fictional books were taken away and had to be replaced with studying. That got to be a big problem because, as I'm a Piscean, I would love to escape into these realms of fantasy. And that's what fiction always gave me. But we weren't talking about regular fiction. It was mostly classics that I was into. And I was also enthralled by adventure books. And Enid Blyton, at one point when I was growing up, was one of my favorite authors. And then it was Charles Dickens. And as I grew up, I started getting deeper and deeper into more of literature. Well, saying that I was an introvert, I also had a naughty side to me. Now, in India at that time, we had gardens that, basically were kind of shared, because we didn't have a kind of a boundary wall to share to separate houses. So you'd have somebody else's mango tree that whose branches would, get into your compound. So I would climb by and try to steal the mangoes, bring them home. And then my grandparents would have to come and explain to the neighbors and tell them that, oh, you know what, my granddaughter's done this, but I'm really sorry. Here, take back your mangoes. So it was a very interesting childhood that I had. And I always remember that I was brought up in a way that I had to respect animals, because that was also a very, very important culture that uh, was prevalent in the country and amongst us as we were growing up. And that probably also has played a huge role in me choosing environmentalism, because in the future I started looking at putting nature in the center of all my designs. And going forward, it was very important for me to find the interconnection between not just nature, but also social and environmental justice. And it all culminating in this one aspect, which is almost intangible, but tangible in several ways, and that is peace. So, yeah, that was my childhood. That was growing up. And I think I had a great time.
Wow, that's beautiful because this is something that we didn't cover, Runa, when we first met. We were covering the areas of topic that we're going to be sharing today. But you are a Pisces, so we just celebrated your season. And They are the dreamers of the zodiac. And obviously, if you'll get to look into Runa's work, or if you already know her today and you're just tuning into this podcast, you'll see the beautiful, exquisite work that she puts on the fashion shows, and even the extension beyond that with her work with United Nations and the Peace Canvas. But we're gonna get to that soon. One of the one of the things that you mentioned too, Runa, was one of the influences in your life. And usually because I should say, this is Women of Agents of Change, I asked Runa if she had a female figure in her life that greatly influenced her work.
So I grew up in a family where my father was an entrepreneur, and he started grassroots level, which meant that he would be out most of the time. And it was my mother who raised me and my brother. So we are who we are because of her, because she was the one who sacrificed her time, who took time out, who ensured that we studied and that we were morally on the right path. My father was always around, but he was the breadwinner and he was trying to make ends meet at that time, which was very, very difficult because we had two young children to take care of, and at the same time he was starting his business, which kind of led into being one of the biggest factories in South India. But that took a lot of time, so that had my mother taking care of us. That being said, she was extremely influential in several decisions that I made that has led me to be who I am right now. One of the reasons being is when I finished my studies, I was at the crossroads to pursue medicine or another field in the arts. She was instrumental where she advised me and told me to follow fashion because at that time it was a very, very new field. She told me that fashion probably needs the same kind of help that one would give when one became a doctor. She also did tell me the number of years of study that is required to become a doctor, whereas the fashion industry might need somebody in the near future to probably help the industry out. So she was the one who was instrumental in helping me choose the line of fashion, and I am very grateful to her because let me again take you back to my childhood. I won the first prize for UNICEF in a painting competition. And she was the one who helped me create this one diagram of a mother duck with her baby. So they both were together, and the mother duck would tell the baby, don't go beyond the hills because they're going to be foxes out there. And that's what I drew. I drew the mother duck trying to tell the baby to be within the boundaries and not go beyond because they could be lurking danger. It probably got to be a mantra for my life in a certain way where you would always be cautious, but at the same time curious. And she was influential by realizing that I was also very artistic. So when it came to my mother's influence, there was one thing that she said. She said, for you, creativity comes easily. So why don't you pursue that? Why do you want to pursue something because you think it might be a challenge for you? Why don't you pursue something that you're really good at and create challenges in that avenue? And that's what I did. I decided to pursue fashion. It was one of the greatest choices that I ever made. I graduated with honors. I won the Best Design Collection award, and I got a sponsorship to go to Paris.
Wow, that's incredible. And Runa, I share the same sentiments with you because my mother is also the inspiration behind my mission work that I do. So I'm in real estate, but then after the passing of my mother, I really decided to really pursue following my passion and serving others. And at one point, she did tell me, I could see that you'd be a great public speaker. And I didn't know where to start, even especially after she passed. But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt she's been guiding me from the other side. And that's why, fast forward 6, 7 years, I get to sit in front of incredible women such as yourself that are doing the same things. So I deeply honor that same part that our mothers were great influences on both of us.
Absolutely. I think mothers go a long way. We need to give them far more credit than we do. I mean, growing up, we take them for granted. It's only when we get to be of a certain age, we realize what they went through to make us who we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, you're now you went to school and you graduated with honors, and then you started in the fashion industry. Now I know that there are quite a few projects that you're embarking upon right now. But let's start with one of the biggest and probably in the nearest and dearest to your heart, which is the seaweed industry and what we spoke about. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that project you have going on?
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, the seaweed industry has been something that I've been involved with for the past 6 years now, maybe even seven. It started off by using seaweed as a method to mitigate water wastage and water pollution. I researched into this one technique, which is called suminagashi, which is a very, very ancient technique in the royal courts of Japan, where they would use seaweed as a coagulant and have water which was in a trough. You have inks that are splashed on the surface, and then you have a fabric that's put onto it, and you pull it out, and you have the pattern, which is basically transferred from the surface of the water onto the fabric. So when I tried this, I realized that I could print 250 yards of fabric using just 10 gallons of water. And that was incredible. And you would have these beautiful organic prints that were made just using 10 gallons of water, as opposed to the thousands of gallons of water that are basically used when it comes to traditional dyeing and printing in the textile industry. That was my first foray into seaweed. And then I decided that it was time to figure out how the seaweed was actually collected. I mean, who were the people behind this? It was great to use it. It was great to kind of create a product out of it and to show how this sea vegetable basically can mitigate water wastage and pollution. So, in my quest, I traveled to one of the cities in the south of India called Mandapam. And this was with the Central Fisheries and Marine Institute of India, which is a government led institute. I wanted to find out how seaweed was truly grown and how it was processed, and what was the industrial process behind it, apart from the middlemen who we always constantly encountered in the fashion industry. So, when I went there, I got to meet a few of the seaweed the fisher folk. It was a very interesting journey, basically, because I got to realize that they were not just growing seaweed, but they also had a kind of a system which they called the integrated fishing system. Now, this would have the seaweed which grew on top. They would have like the nets, which would have fish, and the bottommost net that would probably be the ground feeders. The reason they did that was because you had large companies that were coming into the ocean and trying to privatize that ocean space. And at the same time, you had the bottom trawlers who were taking away all the fish stock by using nets that were as small as the mosquito nets. Now, technically, when you go fishing, you need to have your fishing nets which have a breathing space of 1 inch by 1 inch. The reason being that the juvenile fish can escape and you only catch the adult fish. But because right now there's so much of competition that's happening even in the waters, that you have people using really small nets and catching anything and everything that they get from the ocean. So the seaweed farmers were also suffering, but they're not just seaweed farmers, they're also fisher people, right? So they came up with this really indigenous technique, which was also supported by the by the government and the scientists to develop this kind of a technique that grows seaweed, grows fish, and also has the bottom feeders. Now, the way this works is that you have the fish that kind of are supported by the seaweed on the top, and then you have the fish feed that falls all the way down. So you have like the crabs that kind of eat it off, eat that off, and that can be harvested all in one go. They also started doing a lot of oyster farming, which was the pearl oysters with the seaweed. So you had like several industries that were being integrated with seaweed farming. Now, apart from that, I moved on and I encountered these women who would dive for indigenous seaweed. Now, the fisher people who I spoke about earlier were people who basically worked with a kind of seaweed species that was provided by the government. This seaweed strain was given by Pepsi in the 1980s, and they have continued to use that strain all the way down in 40 years with no other strain that has been introduced. So they have their complaints because they feel that the strain does not have that same impetus that it had 45 years ago. But they have no other choice and continue with the same thing. Whereas the women seaweed divers go and dive into the oceans and they pick up this one particular seaweed that basically grows on rocks. And they have really rudimentary ways of diving. They tie their fingers up using rags so that it doesn't cut them when they pluck the seaweed off the rocks. They just have the goggles that they put on. They put on their men's t-shirt on top of, the Indian garb, which is called a sari, which is basically 5 meters long that women wrap around themselves. But then they put the t-shirt on, they put on their men's shorts, and they just get into the water. And they dive for the seaweed. At the back, they carry a little bag in which the plucked seaweed is put behind. Once they get out of the waters, they have the seaweed that is put on the ground. They sort it out. There's a cleaning process that is done, and then they send it off to these big factories that process it for carrageenan and other products that could be used in the cosmetic industry and the food industry. So the women do not make much money, but this is an alternative livelihood that they have. The reason they do this is because the men folk go into the oceans and spend months in deep sea. The reason they spend months in deep sea is because we do not have much fish stock for them to actually rely upon because of all the causes I just told you earlier, the bottom trawling, the overfishing, and of course the privatization that is happening by large companies. Most of them lose their menfolk, unfortunately, because of rough seas or various other incidents that could happen in the deep sea. Another interesting aspect that came to view was India shares its waters with other countries like Singapore and Sri Lanka. These countries still maintain the biodiversity which is around for their water space. But since India has a problem with it, you do have the fishermen who go into the other countries' territories, and this is met with, bullets because you don't want people trespassing because this is your space. So you do have a lot of challenges which are faced by these women. And that was something, after speaking with them, I created a documentary, and this was also with the Prince Albert II Foundation to understand how we could probably help the lifestyles of these women. And when I spoke to them, I found out this one very interesting phenomenon that happened probably 6 months out of a year. And they would be like, we have invasive algae that takes over our oceans in the summer months for basically 6 months in a row. And that's the time when we don't have seaweed, we don't have fish, everything dies because it blocks the sunlight, and it just grows over like mats. When I came back to California, I found the same phenomenon happening just where I live, by the ocean, in the summers. And that's when I realized that this is a global phenomenon. And I wanted to figure out why this happened. The reason it happened was because of human activity. It was anything to do with pesticides, anything to do with high nitrogen or phosphorus, anything that had this chemical composition going into the oceans would basically trigger off invasive algae, as we call filamentous algae, that would take over the ocean space, especially when you have the warm weather and the sun to kind of exacerbate its growth. As a designer, well, I looked at it. It looked interesting. It had a kind of structure to it. And I was like, there is something about this. I don't know what to do. But I collected this algae when it had dried, and I started making these pieces of activism that spoke about new age materials from the fabric of our oceans. Go forward, I realized that there were ways to probably use this pollutant that was caused because of human activity into something in the fashion industry, because the fashion industry was also contributing towards its growth.
Right.
So, using this material got me to start working not just on an environmental aspect, but also on the social aspect by finding out how these women could harvest this and how we could potentially convert this into a new biomaterial. And that's when I started KelpTex. So KelpTex basically works with invasive algae with an infusion of seaweed to create biotextiles, which can be also used as plastics, used as paper, and also used as leather, with the same kind of formulation, creating product diversification.
Oh, that's incredible. I was just going to say there's so much alignment between what you've done in terms of your work from finding how it could be dyed to even seaweed. So 3 years ago when I filmed my documentary, and I think I briefly shared this with you, Runa, everything in the southern islands of the Philippines was heavily centered around the fishing industry and seaweed. So just to confirm, even before Runa and I met, her and I were both circulating this type of experience in the indigenous communities. And then we're both from California, so we're seeing it in our coastal communities. So this is incredible work that you're doing, Runa. I know that you said, in addition to this becoming a new age textile, it also protects the marine life in coastal communities. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, because invasive algae basically uh, cuts out all light that can enter the oceans. We are talking about crustaceans, we're talking about tiny fish, we're talking about uh, animals, we're talking about marine protected areas basically that are being ruined because of invasive algae. To collect this invasive algae, one has to be really careful. In certain areas, you need to have permits, especially in California, because you need to get it from the fish and wildlife. But at the same time, you have it taking over lakes. So people don't know what to do with it. They collected their billions of dollars being spent by the US government alone for these kind of cleanups. I mean, you can go to the root cause. You can start off by telling the farmers to stop using pesticides, but that's not going to happen because we still have GMO seeds. We can try to introduce new ways to curb the invasive algae growth, like they have tried to introduce carp, but that again gets to be another form of invasive fish if it's not controlled. You can try using bales of straw to basically control again this invasive algae, but that doesn't get to be very very effective in the long run. We're gonna have invasive algae as long as there is human activity. The only thing we need to do is find ways how we can harvest it responsibly and at the same time harvest it and create a material that can help that community and the fashion industry at large. Where the fashion industry moves away from traditional ways of textile making, moving into a new circular, transparent way of creating fabrics And at the same time, the same fabric creating a lot of product diversification, like I said, paper. So we don't need to cut down trees, we don't need extra cellulose, but we use the cellulose content that is given to us by the oceans.
Wow, this is incredible. I mean, Runa, your process, everything from coming across it and really following the different practices and communities for indigenous communities around the world, and now seeing how this all ties in to even save our oceans. I'm really big on saving the coastal oceans and the waters, most especially all of the marine life. You and I share that same sentiment, so I'm really holding that space for you as you are close in the process to getting the patent approved. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes. And so, amongst the many projects, so I am deeply holding this space for the success of that because I know that's literally going to change the world. And in addition to so many of the projects you have going on, one that is a favorite, close to my heart, could you please tell us a little bit more about your work with calling for disarmament and using the fashion industry to do so?
Calling for disarmament. The reason I do this is because I think it's ridiculous to have war. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Why do you need to kill people to get rid of the bad guys to find peace? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, as human beings, we are communal people. We work with each other. We open doors for each other. We see an elderly person, we give up our seats. This is who we are by nature. We are good people. We don't need to kill each other. We don't need war. We don't need anything that basically exterminates human life. And as a fashion environmentalist, how does it even make sense for me to talk about climate action, to talk about creation of materials from invasive algae, to create these biotextiles that are going to be so important for the future and for the oceans and for our space when we're going to be having wars and destroying things anyways, and the environment is anyways getting destroyed. It's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. So when I got to speak with the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons at the United Nations, I gave them the analogy of a T-shirt. And I asked them a simple question. I was like, do you think what you're wearing right now could spark off a war? I mean, I'm asking you this also, Lisa. Do you think what you're wearing right now could spark a war?
I mean, at least from what I'm thinking at this moment, no. But a t-shirt? Like, are you talking about my garments right now?
Anything that we're wearing right now. Anything that we're wearing right now. Do you think it could spark a war? That's my question to you.
I mean, there's a possibility, but I don't think so right now. I mean, at least with what I'm wearing. However, sometimes what I'm thinking on a more expanded level, if there's something that my shirt says and it actually triggers another person, just in that we've seen the craziest things happen in this world. So I'd like for you to have that conversation with me, expand my mind, because this is what I do. And I hope that this does this for the audience.
Okay, so the reason why I say what we are wearing could spark a war is because the fashion industry uses a lot of natural resources. And one of the main natural resource is water. You cannot have any form of textile that you're wearing right now or anything if we do not have water. We have a lot of shared resources that are being shared between countries. China and India share a river that goes through it, the Brahmaputra. You have the Indus River that flows through Pakistan and India. And all these three countries have one common aspect. They're all nuclear armed. If there is going to be any sort of discrepancy when it comes to this one huge natural resource, which is water, You're going to have damming, which is going to happen everywhere. You're going to have countries that are going to suffer. And then what happens? War.
Absolutely.
Migration. This is where the fashion industry comes into play. This is where you need to be careful as to how you use your resources so you leave something behind for your neighbors. There are already cases being put across that India is damming a part of its natural resource, the river that flows through Pakistan. There's nothing that Bangladesh can do about it because it's all upstream. India can't do anything with what China is doing because that is again upstream. So every country has its own way of basically cutting off water supply. And the fashion industry relies upon water supply. And that is why what you are wearing right now could spark a war.
That's incredible, Runa. I mean, once you said it, everything fired off in me. Just because Runa's expansive mind in terms of how she sees everything isn't just from this part of the basic fashion but it's exactly what makes her garments. Me being a big advocate of water, once you said it, it fired off in me and I was like, gosh, this is incredible. The way that she thought about this in the full aspect of how it's all um delivered in your work. And I really even understand that. I'm of course American because I'm born here in the United States, but my heritage is Filipino. And I deeply think about that. Being close to China, being close to Taiwan, sharing the natural resources of oil and gas and gold. Like there my life opened up to so much seeing so much when I really started to diving in deeper into my heritage and culture and really understanding the world from a different set of eyes. So it's incredible the work that you've done here. And this has even led into something even on a grander scale about the peace canvas and your partnership with the United Nations. Can you please share with the audience your work in that space?
Because to segue, Lisa, I mean, the fashion industry has a lot of waste that is generated. And when we're talking about these nuclear armed countries like India, Pakistan, and China, they are also one of the largest producers of textile in the world.
Yeah.
And we just spoke about the natural resource that was shared. But nobody also gets to see this one very important aspect, even though they talk about it, and that is cotton. Everyone talks about cotton. Everyone says that cotton is a thirsty crop. It takes a lot of pesticides. It has GMO. 100% agree. But nobody speaks about cotton as muslin being used as prototypes before you get your final garment out. So everything that we're wearing right now at one point never was this. It was a prototype that was made, and it was made in what? According to the fashion industry, it's cheaper to use cotton to make a prototype rather than your synthetics. So you would save your synthetics to make the final piece in, but you would use cotton to just make all your prototypes till you finally get that gold seal that says, this fits really well. So, what happens to these cotton prototypes? We only see what the consumer waste is. We see the landfills that we keep talking about, like, okay, that $5 t-shirt, you see these mounds of fabric that were left behind. But what happens to all your prototypes? That's also going into the landfill because nobody's going to wear a prototype, especially in a plain cotton, which is like an unbleached muslin. You don't do that. So what I did was I decided to again use fashion as activism and for a cause. I said, let's use all this muslin, any fabric that has a defect, any fabric that doesn't hit the retail market because it has some issue with it. Maybe it's a color defect, maybe the brand didn't approve it, and I decided to make them into canvases. These canvases were distributed to people basically in several countries around the world upon which they wrote their commitments for peace. The canvases were collected and sewn into these flags that represented each country. And I had my first exhibition at the United Nations last year because this is an endorsed project by the UN. And this year, by the time we are at our General Assembly, you will be seeing the second project with new countries who have contributed towards peace. So it's called the Global Peace Flag. Um, we do have a lot of messages that are written by people. It is not political at all. The flag, the movement isn't, but at the same time, it doesn't curtail the voices of people and what they want for peace. So we have people so when the exhibit is up, you're most welcome to come and take a look at it and read about what people identify with peace for, what they want to do in the future. I have worked with, for example, San Quentin State Prison. So I've had like the incarcerated people who basically upcycled all their old uniforms into canvases, and then we made that into a flag. I have worked with jails. I have worked with uh, places that women have violence prone towards them, like one of the largest red light districts with the non-profits, where you had women who basically spoke about violence towards women and how, if that was basically curtailed or we had policies towards it, then their lives would get better and safer. I have worked with universities. I have worked with people who have been refugees from Tibet, who still do not acknowledge China's uh, uh, taking over Tibet. They still speak about free Tibet. They still want their flag. But these are people who are not looking for war. They're just voicing out what they feel and how they would like their neighbors to understand that, you know what, we have been excluded rather, from society. But we're all human. We make mistakes. But at the end of the day, we still need to be connected. They just want people to understand where they come from. They're not trying to spark a war. They're not trying to say something wrong. These are children, some of them. And this is what they feel. Some of the children had even written about marital rape that happens in their own households. I wouldn't expect a 10-year-old boy to write about that, but this is what he wants for peace. So it basically, the Global Peace Flag traverses across various subjects of peace, not just war, peace within yourself, mental health, the fact that, yes, transgenders do have rights. Yes, people who are incarcerated need to be looked upon as human. Yes, women who are working women are also women, but they do this job because they don't have the money. People, kids, students in universities who are idealistic, who look for a world that is united beyond borders. So that is the Global Peace Flag. It's not political at all. And I would really like to reiterate that.
No, Rena, one of the things, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording, but I'm just gonna put it out there. When I was getting ready to record our podcast, I had the idea because I remembered you were talking about having the canvases, sending them out. I think they're gonna be displayed this coming May, so I'll have you share that. And I was like, it just dawned on me. I was like, I'm gonna do one Great Billion Project. And one of the things for myself was, after undergoing this whole vocal recovery, thyroid surgery, and then finding the deeply spiritual path behind it, it was almost like I had given up a gift that was my mission. But then I started to realize, as I got invited to partner with International Peace Bureau, as I was introduced to you and the other women, that I was going to create this platform for every voice in this world to be heard. And that's why I have the mission of 8 Billion Project.
All right.
Joe, I share with you the deep love that you have, that you've put into the work and you've woven into each canvas, or that the people have contributed to weave into each canvas. and I commend you for putting that all together. So, in that respect, this has become one of the most favorite projects I've come across in all the work that I've done, and I'm going to be there to support you as a fellow sister in my contribution in my canvas. So, everyone, if you'd like to be able to contribute to that, and please contact myself, or if you'd like to do one yourself, please feel free to contact Runa. Um, we'll talk about all of that, how they can get a hold of you. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Runa, is this project came about to celebrate first the International Women's Month, and this concept was birthed in March, and it was supposed to be released in March, but it continued to get larger and larger. You were a part of the first batch of women that joined on. And what I wanted to ask you was, now moving into this space where everyone's seen a lot of your work, but one of the things that makes us so unique as women is our love and our passion into the work that we do. I'd like to ask you this, and I know I didn't prepare you for this, but sometimes this is where some of the best messages come out. If you could tap so deeply into your heart and send a message out to the world between all of the experiences you've had from your childhood into your growing up, having your mother influencing you, and then now going into the fashion industry. If there's a heartfelt message you could send that will reach the whole world, what would that be?
I think one always needs to start off by being curious. It's only when you're curious you would basically search for solutions and understand what's happening around you. So it would be curious. The second one I would say would be another C, and that would be care. Because if you're curious, then you care. And with caring comes compassion. And when you have all these together, then I think you are definitely moving in the direction that is so important right now. As women, as you, Lisa, being a woman leader yourself, encouraging other women to come out and to have their stories spoken of. So I think it always starts with curiosity and ends with compassion.
I agree, because it's that childlike wonder that creates that creativity. Because Runa, just like you were talking about reading Oliver Twist and being an introvert, it starts within. I was young and I had the wildest imagination. And I realized that later on, the success in my life was always tapping back into that creativity. And honestly, to anyone that's watching, audience member, whether you're a child, whether you're just going to college, starting your career, whether you're a woman or you're a man, it is tapping into that childlike wonder in order to birth something creative in this world. So I wanted to say thank you for that beautiful message. Runa, you're absolutely a gift to this world. And I cannot wait to see what unfolds of the rest of your career as you are really just scratching the surface. So I'm looking forward to really working with you, being alongside you, supporting you on your mission. And what I'd like to do is for those that are watching, are there any additional projects you want to actually share in here before we start giving them ways of being able to contact you?
We have a very interesting event that is coming up in DC on May 24th, and it's called Threads of Peace. It's at the Ellipse in front of the White House. It's again to do with peace activism. We're going to have some great speakers from various organizations speaking about, for example, the war that's happening in Congo. We're going to be speaking about disarmament, military budget spending, and at the same time, I'm one of the organizers where I will be having a fashion show that speaks about how fashion can contribute towards peace. So this is happening at the Ellipse at the White House grounds on the 24th of May at 1 p.m. So if anyone's in DC at that moment, you are most welcome to come and join us. The second one is going to be, of course, the Global Peace Flag exhibition, which is also going to be at DC. So we're going to be having it on the grounds at the Ellipse. And the second one is at the United Nations. You can just walk in, just go to the Visitors Center. You say that you want to see the Peace Flag exhibition that's currently being held up. And we have new countries. We have Cuba, we have Nepal, of course, we have the US, we have India, we have other countries we would love you to come and take a look at. So this would be around probably during the General Assembly, but I'm looking at August, September, and I will keep you updated.
Yes, please do so, and I'll be able to share that on my social media just to keep promoting this. The exhibition that you have, is it a traveling exhibition or is it stationed?
Yes, it's a traveling exhibition. So we're looking at the Vatican. We're going to try and see if we could have it at the Dharmasthala because we also had, people from Tibet, the refugees under the Dalai Lama who have also contributed towards the flag, and the Dalai Lama is going to endorse it. He turns 90 this year.
Wow.
So we're going to see if we can have it during his birthday.
Nice. That's beautiful. My goodness, Verna. We've covered so much here, and I know if we had longer, we could cover so much more. Your extensive work as a social environmentalist in disarmament, everything that we've covered, and I know that there's so much more that still can unfold. But I'd like to thank you deeply for sitting here and your contributions to the Women of Agents of Change podcast series. I look forward to be able to continue to share your work. And what I'd like to do now is if there's anyone that would like to get a hold of Runa, learn more about her work, Runa, could you please share the ways in which people can contact you?
You can always email me. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. My email is very simple. It's contact@runaray, RUNARAY.com. So contact@runaray.com.
Awesome. And your work is on your website too. Is that runaray.com?
Yes.
Awesome. So for the audience, if you'd love to learn more about Runa's work all across the board, you can go on our website, and from there, there'll be contact information. And what I'll do in the description below is put some plug-in links to her social media. So Runa, thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this series and your contributions, not only to this series, but your contributions to building peace all across the world. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.